Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. The Sports Bash is live on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. You can listen to the Phillies tomorrow on the mobile app. That starts at 4:30. Don't forget tonight, Flyers hockey is back on 97.3 ESPN and the mobile app. We'll go Flyers to the Thursday night football game. Not a great game tonight, PT. Washington and Chicago. You interested?
Not really, sir, but I'll be checking out the Flyers at least until we
going Flyers?
Disinterested in that. Oh, yeah, we're starting with Flyers.
Go Flyers. Football, where's the baseball in your pantheon tonight?
Last.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll get updates on my phone, but yeah, and we've talked about this before, the difficulty in going back and forth between Prime Video and whatever you're watching on the regular television.
Yeah.
So I don't know that Washington and Chicago are going to get a lot of my attention.
All right, well, let's get the matchups for this one, Sunday Night Football. We talked to Mike Golick in the first hour, PT.
It was fun.
And he said when we asked about a weakness for the Eagles,
he really struggled.
He could not really find one. But let's see how they match up with this Dallas team. That's where we bring Andrew DiCecco in from InsideTheBirds.com. And he always breaks these matchups down really good on these Thursday Football at 4s. Andrew, what's going on, buddy?
Mike and Pete, how's it going?
It's all good, man, and happy to have you back as we get ready to break down maybe the biggest game of the season. I mean, quite frankly, they're going to play Dallas late in the year. We don't know what that game's going to mean. How big is this game? What does this game mean, even this early in the season, in terms of playoffs, home field, and all that jazz in the NFC?
Well, it does mean a lot, and you hate to put such a high precedent on a Week 6 game, but you have two good teams that stand atop that are vying for NFC supremacy here, and the Eagles and the Cowboys, and they're both firing on all cylinders. And you have this nationally televised game, and you have, it's the platform where the cream rises to the top. So I think knowing what you have, feeling out your opponent, and just moving forward, it's really going to be a measuring stick game for both of these franchises. And I mean, I can't stress the amount of the importance enough to see where both teams are at this juncture in the season.
Okay, having said that, let's try to fight fire with fire here. When you look at the matchups, the Eagles' offensive line against the Dallas front, that's probably the most intriguing matchup maybe in the entire league. That might be the best pass rush in the league. This might be the best offensive line in the league. So they're going to pair up on Sunday night. Break that down. Yeah,
well, that's where it gets really interesting, because what becomes of Jordan Mailata and his status for the game? I mean, it seems like he would be on track to play, but if he doesn't, guys, all of a sudden Jack Driscoll reprises his role as a left tackle in the interim, and that's where things get interesting, because you would think that if you're Dallas, you're finding a way to isolate Micah Parsons on Jack Driscoll and take advantage of that matchup. But even if they don't, Mike, I mean, they have a couple of guys that were banged up throughout last week's game, and you have to wonder how ready they're going to be in prime time. I mean, I anticipate them all giving it a go, but I mean, sometimes these things tend to resurface. And going against a team like Dallas, where they have a DeMarcus Lawrence, they have a Osa Ozigizuwa, who actually is a pretty underrated pass rusher as well. And I mean, they have Dorrance Armstrong, who had a big game last week, of course. They have a rich plethora of defensive linemen and a good rotation of guys that can really get after the quarterback. So the Eagles, that's where the matchup's really going to be. And I think if without Jordan Mailata, or if any of those guys are limited, that could really be the deciding factor. I think what's going to happen is the Dallas Cowboys are going to try and sell out to stop the run, make the Eagles one-dimensional, and really try and tee off on Jalen Hurts and take advantage of it and try to momentum that way. That's sort of how I anticipate their game plan shaping up.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that they have these great pass rushers, and the Eagles' offensive line is banged up. That being said, the Eagles are probably inclined to try to run the ball at them. You say they're going to try to sell out for the run, but can Philadelphia say, you know what, you could try it, but you're not going to stop us? Is that the weak spot of the Dallas defense defending the run?
I think if you're really going to examine the defense and where you can trying to exploit some of their weaknesses, I think it would be the run defense. If you're if you're really looking at it that way, they're a pretty well-rounded defense. I don't want to take anything away from them, but the Eagles are a pretty good rushing attack too, and have probably the NFL's most dominant offensive line to pave the way for a guy like a Miles Sanders. And Jalen Hurts, who, by the way, I think 14 or 15 carries is entirely too much. You don't want to see your quarterback take those kind of hits. But I think that when you look at Miles Sanders and Kenny Gainwell, and maybe you get Trey Sermon going this week if Boston Scott's not right, or if you want to bring a downhill element, I think that Trey Sermon could take 3 or 4 carries this week as well. The Eagles have a really potent rushing attack, and I think that you're going to see them try to establish Miles Sanders early. But I really do think if you're Dallas and you know that you're going to have your hat on your pass rush, you're going to try and sell out the run and really pin your ears back and try and force the Eagles to become one-dimensional and get after Jalen Hurts.
You know, you mentioned Hurts. I'm glad you brought that up. Sal Paolantonio texted me earlier with this stat that Hurts has been contacted more than any quarterback in the league. He has been hit 84 times. He has been hit a league-leading 17 times per game. If that pace goes on, he's going to be hit a record 285 times. Is there some concern with the amount of times that Jalen Hurts is taking shots for you, Andrew?
Wow, that would obliterate David Carr's numbers, I imagine, from 2002. But, I mean, that's an alarming number, guys, when you really look at that and you know how important Jalen Hurts is to the offense. I mean, he's the engine that makes everything go. And just to hear those numbers and really, I mean, just to sort of try and reconcile what that would mean, I don't know that, I mean, obviously that's not sustainable. But I also think that the running element to the Eagles' offense, Jalen Hurts' legs, is a big part of the offense. So they need to find a way to balance that out because obviously double-digit carries from your quarterback is not sustainable. I do think that Jalen's a smart runner, but and I think that a lot of his runs and how savvy he is in getting down and finding the sideline and things like that, it also can frustrate defenders, right? And we've seen that rear its head in the preseason, and we've seen that in week 1, and it frustrates defenders who can play it so well, but they can't account for such a smart runner like Jalen, and it also can lend itself to late hits and things like that. So that's something that I think the Eagles need to be mindful of as they venture deeper into the season, because Jalen can't withstand, no matter how tough he is, and he is pretty well built for a quarterback. I mean, no one can withstand all those hits. So it is a cause for concern, in my opinion.
Andrew DiCecco with us. Andrew, the Eagles lead the league with 58 explosive plays, and as you look through different matchups, A.J. Brown versus Trayvon Diggs, that could be one where the Eagles try to get explosive plays. Can the Dallas secondary, do they have an answer for the Eagles there, or is that explosive play trend going to continue?
You know, you mentioned A.J. Brown and Trayvon Diggs, Pete, and another thing that I would look at is Anthony Brown versus Devontae Smith, right? I think that this could be a game where you see Devontae Smith take advantage of the lack of long speed from a guy like Anthony Brown and stretch the field that way. That you don't always see Devontae be able to do that. I mean, last week he had 10 catches for, I believe, 87 yards, so he was really a short to intermediate guy, but he can really affect the field on all 3 levels, and I think you may see that really play itself out this week given the matchup. A.J. Brown, you almost take him in any matchup, right? I mean, I think a guy like Trayvon Diggs, he gets a lot of credit and a lot of hype, but he's someone who does take a lot of chances and a lot of gambles, and that can also work both ways. You know, that's feast or famine, and if you're going to do that against a guy like A.J. Brown, who's very physical and really doesn't allow much. I mean, he has he can shorten the windows for quarterbacks and things like that. So I really would. I like the matchups on both, and I also like Quez Watkins going against Jordan Lewis, their nickel corner as well. I think that if Jalen Hurts has enough time, there's going to be a chance for some plays down the field. So I mean, it behooves the Eagles to try and see if they can get that going early to make it a really balanced attack.
So A.J. Brown versus Trayvon Diggs, Devontae Smith against Anthony Brown, and Quez Watkins versus Jordan Lewis. I'm looking at all the defenders here, Andrew. Who matches up with Dallas Goedert? Because we're talking about A.J. Brown and we're talking about Devontae Smith. We haven't mentioned the tight end yet.
Right, and their second level is really talented. I mean, especially as far as in terms of pass rush. But I think you might see one of their guys like a Jaron Kearse, who's 6'4", which is abnormal size for a safety. He has great length and some athleticism to him. So I think you might see him draw an assignment. But either way, Dallas Goedert is arguably playing as one of the highest levels, among the highest level of anyone on offense right now. So I think that he is almost matchup proof, guys, at this point, and I think you're going to see him get involved into the game plan early, which is really good for Jalen because there's a synergy there and there's an obvious rapport between those two. And I think connecting with Dallas early allows Jalen to settle in. You got a primetime matchup. You're coming off a tough win against the Arizona Cardinals, and I think that would help sort of settle in the offense and get them into a rhythm early. So I think Goddard's going to be a heavy presence into the offense this week again.
Good matchup this week, of course. It's Dallas at Philly, Sunday Night Football. You can listen to the game on 97.3 ESPN. The matchups to watch, we're breaking them down with Andrew DiCecco. I want to look at the other side of the ball because the Eagles' defense, this is a Dallas offense that really isn't all that explosive. Looks like Cooper Rush is going to play. Hasn't really turned the ball over much, but they're not asking him to do a lot. So what is the Dallas game plan against this Philly defense? What can they continue to do if they want to put enough points on the board needed to win?
It's interesting, right? Because I think that they're going to try and establish the run where you've seen the Eagles really – there's been spurts throughout the season where you start to question, is this team competent enough to, hold their own against the run consistently? And there's been times there where they let some chunk plays go, and I think they might try to get Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard going. Tony Pollard is a player who I think is going to be a prominent fixture in this game for Dallas in terms of offensively. I think you might see him get a lot of these dump-off throws from Cooper Rush, and I also think you might see him work and you're going to see him work in concert with Ezekiel Elliott. I don't think that Zeke is going to be the bell cow that many think. I think you're going to see a lot of Pollard, he's a much different runner than Zeke. He's more explosive and has more of the home run type of element to his game. And then when you look at the offense, I thought that Dalton Schultz would have a much more of an integral role in the offense than he has so far. Just 9 receptions for 80 yards on the year, and CeeDee Lamb leads the team there. But I don't know that the Eagles secondary is going to allot much in terms of air yards to Dallas if the pass rush is able to get home. I mean, I think that Dalton Schultz would have to be a feature player for them, and I also think that Pollard would be, in the short to intermediate game and in the run game. But I don't know that they're going to be able to find much success through the air this game, given the Eagles' defensive line prowess.
Yeah, and that's should be interesting because when we think of Dallas in the past, we have thought about their offensive line. We obviously know they've had some injuries on that line. Where is that line right now? How is the Eagles' front, I guess that rotation of guys match up there? Because I think that you mentioned Pollard. I agree with you. I think Pollard's a big key in this game, and I wonder if the Eagles go with more Jordan Davis in this game, thinking that Dallas is going to try to control the game and run the ball a bit.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. And you started to see Jordan Davis's snaps increase. And I think that he's becoming more comfortable, and the Eagles like what they have in him. And knowing how teams are going to try to attack the Eagles now, I think you're going to see a lot more of they're going to try to establish the run and see if they can get that going and eat up the clock and keep the offense off the field. I think that's going to be a lot of teams' approach right now until they prove they can consistently stop it. But I think that Tony Pollard, I agree with you. I think Tony Pollard is going to be a heavy presence. But looking at their offensive line guys, Tyler Smith, their left tackle, was somebody who they drafted to be a guard initially at least, and he really only had his raw tools to fall back on. But he's been a great story of someone who has just developed immensely over the past month or so. He's really come into his own there. Biadasz, the center, is someone who took a lot of flack early on in his career with Dallas, but he's been really solid. But he will struggle against some bigger body defensive tackles. Some of those maulers. The same goes for their guard. I'm forgetting his name. Matt Farniok, their guard. He's someone that I think is going to struggle with a guy like a Jordan Davis. And even Javon and Fletcher Cox as well. Right tackle Terrence Steele has been a great story of development. He was an undrafted free agent in 2020. He has an incredibly fast get-off, and it's allowed him to a lot of these get to the spot before the defender, and when you wouldn't necessarily think so. I think his burst and his reactionary instincts off the line has allowed him to maximize his skill set, and he's gotten better every year, and he's been one of their most consistent players on offense, actually. So their tackles are playing at a high level right now, And so on the surface, you might not see a whole lot of household names in their guys, but I think they're really playing cohesively, and you're seeing a lot of these guys come into their own at this point in the season.
Andrew, it looks like Cooper Rush is going to be the quarterback, but how much of a difference is that from Dak Prescott? And are you also amused, like I am, of the Cowboys fans that are like, Dak, keep rehabbing, don't come back? Like, people actually don't want their franchise quarterback to come back. It's almost ridiculous.
Yeah, there's always that recency bias, Pete. You know how it goes. The backup quarterback is typically the most popular guy in the city. But, I mean, look, from my vantage point, they're not able to execute what they would normally be able to do with Dak Prescott. The playbook's much more narrow and limited given what they're able to do with Cooper Rush. He's going to play it close to the vest. He's not going to turn it loose quite like Dak would. I think you're going to see him do a lot, try and execute a lot of safe throws with intermediate options and not really threatening a guy like Darius Slay or James Bradbury. I still think that Slay is going to be good for a turnover this game. I think he's going to come up with an interception, maybe even Bradbury as well, because I do think there's going to come a point in the game where Cooper Rush is going to force one in there to a tight window, and the Eagles' defensive backs they're playing at such a high level right now that that's not going to work. So I just think that you're going to see a very conservative game plan from the Cowboys, given what they have at the quarterback. And I think that ultimately you're going to see him try to throw some up there, and it's just not going to work out.
Andrew, you generally will give an X factor over at InsideTheBirds.com. This is a game I think there are many X factors. I mentioned Tony Pollard as a guy that I'm going to be keeping an eye on here, but who is someone that you think could be that X factor for both teams?
I'll give you two for Dallas on offense, just off the top of my head. Tony Pollard, of course. I also think that Michael Gallup, who's fresh off an injury, who's starting to round back into form, he has a different skill set than a lot of the Cowboys receivers do. And I think that if they are going to take a deep shot and try to stretch the back end of the Eagles secondary, he's going to be the guy to do it. And I think that they're going to at least take a shot or two just to keep the defensive backs honest. So I think that Michael Gallup is going to be a player to watch in that game. And I would probably look at a guy like Jaron Kearse on defense as someone that could be an X factor if he draws the assignment of Dallas Goedert, and which I think that's probably a pretty good likelihood in just his length and rare athleticism. And then on the Eagles offensively, I mentioned him last week, and I mentioned him again. Devontae Smith. Devontae had 10 receptions last week. I think he's going to be. He draws such a favorable matchup going against the slow-footed Anthony Brown. Anthony's very physical, but Devontae, such a savvy route runner, knows how to get open, and I think that you're going to see him really stretch the field in this game, which you didn't really see last week. The opportunities should be there to do that. So, and TJ Edwards is going to be an X factor in that if they can force the Dallas Cowboys to if they can force them to become one-dimensional and stop the run, I think TJ Edwards, that's his forte. Get him coming downhill and plug the holes there in the running game and force Cooper Rush to have to throw, and get guys like Brandon Graham and Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick and all those guys coming after him, pinning their ears back. I mean, I think that in itself could determine the game.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, it's Sunday Night Football, and really a measuring stick for both teams because, Andrew, we've heard a lot for everybody in this league. Well, you really haven't played anybody. Dallas has beaten the Rams and the Bengals. They were in the Super Bowl last year. Philadelphia, you can make an argument that really hasn't beaten a marquee team. They did beat Minnesota, who is 4-1, but this is probably the best team that either one of these two teams will play. We'll see it all unfold. Who do you like on Sunday night?
On Sunday night, well, I think this is going to sort of unfold like a couple of prize fighters. It's going to be a slugfest early, guys, but the Eagles are the more talented team, and I think they're going to pull this one off, 27-14. I think they're going to pull away late, and I ultimately think that Cooper Rush isn't going to be able to get it done with his arm, and I think that's ultimately what it's going to come down to. So that could be the deciding factor.
All right, Andrew's back on Thursday next week. The Eagles have a bye, by the way, next week. We'll talk about this team after 6 games when he's back on the Sports Bash Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, bud.
You got it. Take care.
Andrew DiCecco, great breakdown as always here on the Sports Bash, live 97.3 ESPN.